What is up, guys? I am SJ from 10 Points of Slashing, and in this series we talk about games that may be a little bit past their prime, but are absolute gems nonetheless. Aspire's remasters of Soul Reaver 1 and 2 just came out in December, and going back to Nosgoth after all of this time feels like a homecoming. And in this video, we are going to talk about 3 of the things that made Nosgoth feel like a home to begin with. For those of you that are coming to this franchise fresh with the remasters, welcome. We're glad to have you. And it's gonna be nice to finally have somebody to talk about these games with. For those of us that have been Legacy of Kain fans for the long haul, congratulations, our waiting paid off. I think these remasters perfectly capture the magic of Soul Reaver, and I am going to attempt to do that in this video by talking about 3 of the things that made these games incredible. The 3 things that just completely enthralled me when I first played them that I think a lot of people are going to be able to relate to. Ladies and gentlemen, Soul Reaver. We'll kick it off with the obvious one, the narrative. And more specifically, within the massive umbrella of Soul Reaver's narrative, the characters. Within the first few seconds of the intro cutscene for Soul Reaver, we know that we're about to step into a world with a history. A troubled one. A storied one. A world that is far more complex than Purple Dragon saves the Dragon Kingdom or Orange Bandicoot thwarts Mad Scientist, with themes that transcend good versus evil. This is a world and a story that is deeper and more involved than the stories that were presented to us in any other video game in the 90s. And I'd even go so far as to compare it favorably to the games of today. The narrative of Soul Reaver is built on the bones of the narrative established by Blood Omen, a game developed by Canadian developer Silicon Knights and published by Crystal Dynamics in 1996. When a sequel for Blood Omen was greenlit, the relationship between Crystal Dynamics and Silicon Knights fell apart, and ultimately resulted in Crystal Dynamics maintaining the rights to the franchise. So, Crystal Dynamics put one Amy Hennig, who had worked with Silicon Knights on Blood Omen, in charge of the development and writing of Soul Reaver. You may recognize Amy Hennig as the writer and director of the first 3 Uncharted games. Together with Richard LaMarchand, who also later went on to work on Uncharted, and Jim Curry, who worked on Blood Omen, the 3 crafted the absolute game changer of a video game narrative that Soul Reaver presents us. Taking place thousands of years after Kain's fateful decision at the end of Blood Omen, Soul Reaver introduces us to Raziel and Kain right off the bat. 2 characters that are A, voiced by 2 ridiculously talented and passionate voice actors, and B, clearly in conflict with one another. These 2 things hook you in right away. In Michael Bell, Simon Templeman, and Tony J's voices, you can hear an insane level of investment in this story. It doesn't sound like a bunch of dudes voicing characters for a paycheck. Their performances are so incredibly convincing that you can't help but feel invested in the story yourself. You've known Raziel for all of 3.5 minutes by the time the game hands you the keys, and you're already ready to topple Kain's corrupt empire. Like your best friend said, hey, we don't like Kain. And you're just like, yeah, fuck Kain, let's fucking kill him. I honestly think that I'd attribute most of my love for this narrative to these gentlemen's performances. You can just hear how seriously they each took this, how much fire and passion goes into every line delivered in this game. Every insult Raziel spits at Kain feels like it's full of actual hatred. Every condescending word from Kain's mouth feels like it's coming from somebody who's actually dealt with the shit that he has for thousands of years. Every manipulation from the Elder God feels compelling and twisted, like these words are coming from an ancient, incomprehensible entity. Fun fact, I actually ranked Tony J's performance as the Elder God in my top 3 video game voice performances of all time a few years ago in a podcast. All in all, I just don't think that the narrative of this game would have been as compelling as it is without these 3 guys at the helm of the voice acting. But with that said, even when you consider the story of Soul Reaver without factoring in the voice acting, it's incredible. Waking up after 500 years of torture to a world that has long since been destroyed, with the only spark of hope in the world being taking down Kain, the guy that stabbed you in the back and is the cause of all of your suffering. How could somebody not want to see that story through to its conclusion? Nosgoth, even as it was presented to us in Soul Reaver 1 as the rotted carcass of what it once was, is a wildly interesting setting, and it only becomes more interesting as you start learning its history in Soul Reaver 2 and Defiance. The pillars, the binding, the Seraphan, all of it is just fascinating. And on that note, I think Soul Reaver's use of time travel is one of the strongest uses of it that I've seen in any media whatsoever. Time travel is a tricky thing to incorporate into a narrative. You run the risk of completely breaking parts of the continuity, or worse, introducing Deus Ex Machina into it. But I think Soul Reaver manages to create an incredibly compelling and, take this next word with a grain of salt, believable, dark fantasy setting, despite relying heavily on time travel and the multiple timelines created by Raziel and Kain. At its core, this is a story about the one timeline that Raziel and Kain did something different, and it's just fascinating to think about that kind of thing, and the wild amount of potential that this world has for other stories to be told outside of the stories of Raziel and Kain. If there is one thing about Soul Reaver that just grabs you as a player right off the bat, it's the narrative. And I can honestly say that the Legacy of Kain franchise, specifically Soul Reaver 1, 2, and Defiance, is what drew me away from arena shooters and platformers towards single-player, narrative-heavy games. Which, oddly enough, the first time I ever thought, damn, I really want to go play a single-player game with a killer story, I went to GameStop and picked up Uncharted, not knowing anything about Amy Hennig or her connection to either franchise. With that, we'll move on to the second of three things that made Soul Reaver incredible: box puzzles. Everybody loves box puzzles. This is objective fact. The third thing that made Soul Reaver incredible is seriously though, the puzzles. Which I think that even though I'm citing them as one of the things that made Soul Reaver incredible, I think the puzzles are also one of the reasons that Soul Reaver wasn't a huge, massively successful blowout of a franchise and has instead been reduced to this kind of cult following status. The late 90s and early 2000s were an interesting time for games. As technology rapidly advanced, so too did people's gameplay preferences. We wanted more action. We wanted guns and explosions and instant gratification. The onset of first-person shooters gave us a taste of what visceral video game action could really feel like, and that's what a lot of us wanted. Games where you had to use your brain, even mildly so, just weren't selling as well as the fast-paced bangers were. But I think Soul Reaver, the first game specifically, achieved the perfect balance of the level of necessary brain use in its puzzles to give players a sense of challenge while also providing everything the player needed to figure shit out on their own without resorting to Google or, at the time, a Prima strategy guide. And 25 years after this game hit the shelves for the first time, these puzzles still feel that way. There's a sense of challenge when you walk into a puzzle room, and a sense of accomplishment and pride when you figure it out and get it done. Like I said, I think Soul Reaver is a masterclass in what a video game puzzle should be. I think that sometimes in games, puzzles can be overly complex and convoluted. I see this the most in games that aren't really puzzle games. They just feature a puzzle or two here and there, and they're just ridiculously hard, or the solution is so obscure you kinda have to Google it. There are other times that puzzles are just excuses to break up gameplay and present no more challenge than matching colored pieces to one another in a Lego game. But Soul Reaver perfectly splits those extremes down the middle and presents players with things that you do actually have to think about and kind of survey the room and the puzzle as a whole before attempting to solve it. But the solution is always right there. It isn't painfully obvious, but it's there. And I think that for a game that features puzzles as prominently as Soul Reaver, this is the perfect balance and level of challenge. With that said, Soul Reaver 2 and Defiance definitely eased up on the challenge and frequency of puzzles, probably for the very reason that I described earlier. The market wanted more action, so Eidos demanded that of Crystal Dynamics. And I'll be completely honest, if they hadn't done that, I probably would have completely missed out on this incredible story and franchise. But either way, experiencing these puzzles again in the remaster felt just as good as going through them the first time all those years ago. The third thing that made Soul Reaver incredible is something I've already talked about in this video, but it definitely deserves its own spot on this list: Nosgoth itself. When I was a kid, I had a copy of a demo disc that had a Soul Reaver video demo on it. It wasn't a playable demo, just a video that showed off some cinematics and a little bit of gameplay. I've done some digging and I'm reasonably sure that it was the Eidos Volume 3 demo disc, but I could be wrong. Either way, I remember watching this video and just being fascinated with it all. And at some point in the video, I remember seeing 3 groundbreaking words that stuck with me: no load times. As a child in 1998, all I understood about that is, no sitting around waiting for the game to load? Hell yeah, sign me up. But as an adult, I'm able to recognize something deeper than that in Soul Reaver. The seamless, interconnected 3D world of Nosgoth created a level of immersion in a video game that I don't think had ever been seen up to that point in time. It was insane. The interconnectedness of the world made it feel like it was its own world. From the depths of the abyss to the human citadel, all the way to the Oracle's caves, you could see that Nosgoth had a history. And even though what we were experiencing was the long dead version of Nosgoth, it still felt alive in a way. And that feeling persisted moving into Soul Reaver 2, where you're able to see more of Nosgoth before its destruction. Grassy hills and human villages gave us a look at what was lost, and it just made Nosgoth feel even more alive. I don't think there are many other games out there in 2025, let alone in 2001, where you're able to see the game's world before and after its absolute destruction. But Soul Reaver 2 gave us that. It's insane the level of immersion that Crystal Dynamics were able to achieve with Soul Reaver when you consider that this game was developed in the infancy of 3D gaming. But then again, maybe that's one of the reasons that it did feel so immersive back then. In contrast to isometric 2D beat-em-ups, it didn't really take much to stand apart as an immersive experience. However, I'd personally still put Soul Reaver up as one of the most immersive video games I have ever played, even after 25 years. And I don't think I'm alone here. These games made a huge impact on the dark fantasy genre, and you can see their influence on modern games. I know everybody says this, but you would be crazy not to recognize the similarities between Soul Reaver and Dark Souls. Nosgoth is one of the most incredible video game worlds I have ever experienced, and it's a goddamn shame that we haven't seen more of it. Hopefully this is going to change soon, but who knows, man? I'm definitely holding out hope for something like the 2013 title Nosgoth, or just something that allows us to experience this world outside of the stories of Raziel and Kain. Let me know in the comments what your ideas for games set in Nosgoth are. And before we close this video out, I did want to highlight one level in particular that I felt all 3 of the things I talked about in this video to the nth degree. The narrative, the puzzles, and the world of Soul Reaver all coming together and just absolutely shining in one specific section. The Silenced Cathedral. Everything about this place is just fucking awesome. An ancient weapon that was once used by humans to fight vampires now lies dormant, as Zephon, one of Kain's vampire lieutenants, and his clan have moved in and now occupy it. Its dark corridors, industrial theme, and the overall sense of dread within the Silenced Cathedral exemplify the world of Nosgoth in a way that just completely immerses you. Moving through the cathedral as you navigate its puzzles and fight back Zephon's abominations is just peak Soul Reaver. And Aspyr did an absolutely incredible job preserving the creepiness of this place with the texture work. And I'm super happy that they kept the low draw distance. It's definitely one of the biggest contributors to the incredible atmosphere in this place. Soul Reaver 1 and 2 are absolutely legendary games, and as I said at the top of this video, were instrumental in guiding me down the path of playing more narrative-heavy games. As far as I'm concerned, Aspyr deserves yet another round of applause for managing to remaster classics while keeping the energy and feeling of the original games completely intact. For returning fans of Soul Reaver, I hope you feel the sense of homecoming that I do, and for new fans of the series, once again, welcome to Nosgoth. Thank you so much for checking out the video and the channel, and let me know what you think. Do you have a different top 3 for the things that made Soul Reaver incredible for you? And what's your favorite section or level? Drop me a comment. And of course, if you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing. Obviously, it helps the channel grow and all that, but at the end of the day, I just really appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoyed the video. On that note, though, I did just want to give a community shout out real quick. Drysidle0296, I think that's how you say that name, is our first official channel member, so thank you so much for the support. If you're interested in becoming a member, please feel free to check that out on the channel page, but as it stands right now, really the only perks that I am able to offer is just access to community posts, just kind of behind the scenes pictures, polls, shit like that. As the channel grows, I'm sure I'm going to be able to do more for you guys, but if you'd like to support the channel beyond just watching the videos, that's a great way to do it. But again, like I said, I just appreciate your time. One last time, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Enjoy the Soul Reaver remasters, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya. Hopefully this is going to change soon. Am I fucking Sean Connery?